Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes, an Out of Frame podcast. I'm your host, Sean Malone, creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame, a video series on pop culture, the intersection of pop culture, art, and big ideas. Here with me today in studio for the first time in quite a while, we got all of our technical difficulties worked out, is Paul Nelson, who's just spent a brutally late night editing a new episode of Out of Frame Shorts. How are you feeling, man?
I've learned a lot.
I've learned a lot. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute because actually I'm really excited about the episode that Paul just cut. And of course, not in studio, but all the way from Utah, Jen Mafasanti, Director of Communications for the Libertas Institute. I always want to say that wrong every time.
Literally everyone who doesn't work there says it wrong. It's fine. It's
sure.
Libertas.
It is Libertas, and I'm trying to get that stuck in my head.
Is there like a elevator story of why it's Libertas?
Or is that actually how you're supposed to say it in the Latin? Is that
I
the
think
true
it's
way?
how you're supposed to say it in the Latin.
See,
Yeah.
that
Mostly
level of
what I
pedantry
know
just
is
seems
that
correct.
is how. Oh, sorry about that. My internet kind of slowed down for just a second, and I did not catch what you said. But most of what I know is that that's how Connor says it's pronounced, so that's how it's pronounced.
Well, he founded it, so sure.
Yeah. You found it, you get to name it.
Yeah, I guess so. Although I say that and it just recalls my long-standing disagreement with the idea of GIF versus GIF. Which, I'll get some hypocritical points on because the founder of GIF says GIF, but he's wrong. So it's fine.
He is 100% wrong.
If he felt strongly about it, he should have been here 20 years ago.
That's how I feel about that, especially Connor made the smart move of establishing the pronunciation early, right when the organization was founded, whereas GIF is it's been around for way too long. You can't retcon that.
No.
Oh man. But today we're talking about a couple different things, and like the funny thing is, the connection that we were kind of going for originally was really just Disney Plus and kind of what's new in the Disney world. So we're going to talk about Raya and The Last Dragon, which came out recently. And then for our Patreon and Subscribe Star bonus section, we're going to actually stick around and kind of wrap up some of our thoughts about WandaVision because that show has concluded.
I have a lot of thoughts.
What's that? Oh, I have a lot of thoughts too.
Oh.
I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on that though. So we're going to talk about both of those. But one of the interesting things I think about both shows that I didn't really think about until Jen mentioned something about this earlier was that they're both sort of predicated on, or at least the MCU and Raya are both predicated on this idea of a world where in the MCU's case, it's literally half the population, but in the Raya case, it's like 90+% of the population is gone for years, and 5 years in the case of the MCU and 6 years in the case of Raya. And all of the sort of fallout from those from those tragedies, basically. So it's kind of actually a more connected episode than I thought when we were initially starting it. But before we get to Raya, which I have a lot of thoughts on as well, and I saw actually in theaters, which is, as much as I love going to theaters, there's just not a lot out that you can go see. And so I tend to go when I can to the things that are big and new. But then I find that that one thing is the only thing that's in theaters for weeks or months, even in some cases. So anyway, I enjoyed seeing Raya in the theaters for a lot of reasons that I think we'll talk about in a bit. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous movie. But before we get to all of that, how are you guys doing? And what have you been filling your times with the last week?
Well, like you hinted at, we've been working on the latest short. This episode is airing. It should be out.
Yeah,
already.
I think it'll be out by the time this comes out.
And a little bit of spoilers for the episode. We won't get into the meat of it, but it is. Sean could talk more about this because, as I will reveal, this is a topic I knew zero about. But it is we're talking about the 1960s pulp fiction books that led to people going to prison because it was too much smut.
Yeah. So this it was too sexy. There's this book called Cinerama, which is one of my favorite books. It's a book I read years ago, like maybe 5-6 years ago, and I love the book. It's a fascinating book. Jen, did you actually read the entire book to do the thing, or did you kind of get through little bits of it? But so the book is great, and I highly recommend everybody actually read this book. But I picked it up just sort of on a whim, just because it seemed like an interesting pop culture topic that I didn't know a whole lot about, like Paul, and I just thought, well, I'm intrigued by all this kind of stuff, and I like the history of these things, so I wanted to check it out. It turned out to be a history of anti-free speech legislation, maybe more than anything else, an anti-free speech culture to a large extent. And so, like, what you end up seeing is, like, there's this whole cottage industry that was actually fully a black market in some cases, where people were writing and publishing books that were, too obscene, they were listed as obscene, and people, like Paul said, people were sent to jail, people were fined and prosecuted, people's bookstores were raided and shut down. The Postmaster General actually rifled through people's mail to make sure that they weren't shipping these kinds of books through the mail. I mean, the amount of aggressive anti-free speech policy that we had, and this is in the 60s, and even into the late 60s, this stuff was still being challenged. It just seemed like it's something that I wanted to talk about on Out of Frame for a long time, and it was something that was always a little tricky because it's a sensitive subject. I mean, it's sex and it's
right.
There are some things in the way that we conceive of it now that is sort of obscene, even today still, except for if you actually read passages from any of these books, it's the tamest stuff that you would ever read. I mean, it's just so mild compared to, because the reality is this is the time of Elvis and the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And it's people getting upset because Elvis is shaking his hips provocatively. These are the people that we're talking about legislating morality and legislating obscenity in this case. So it's pretty absurd. So anyway, Jen wrote the core episode, and Jen did a great job. I tweak all of these things a little bit, but the bones and the meat of it is all Jen for the shorts. And I thought it was really good. And I'm really excited about this episode. It's going to be a weird one for us, I think, just because it's not a subject that's an MCU movie or something that a lot of people know about inherently, but I think it's a pretty good episode.
Yeah,
so.
My Google image search history.
Yeah, ruined.
Yeah, it's very interesting right now.
I believe it.
Yeah,
and if y'all really want a movie to go along with this episode of Out of Frame Shorts, I recommend The People versus Larry Flynt. I wanted to include some of that stuff in this episode, and I just couldn't because of length reasons. It was already running long with just kind of explaining the core of obscenity and why it's such a big deal in this situation. But yeah, I recommend it, and not least because Larry Flynt himself recently passed away. So there you go.
Yeah, so that was Jen's original pitch to me was to do an episode on Larry Flynt, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I've got this thing in the can sort of already. I wrote tons of notes. I basically had half a script written out already for this episode, but I always kind of held it back because I didn't know how we were going to do it and still maintain a sort of PG kind of rating on the thing, which I try to do, which is amusing to me anyway, because I've got so many things that are age restricted, and we try so hard to make sure that everything is perfectly safe for work and perfectly safe for classrooms and stuff like that. And you're never going to get everything right, but the fact that YouTube thinks that 7 of my videos are not appropriate for people under 18 is kind of insane. But
my favorite is that the Legend of Korra episode is age restricted, and it's literally about a kid's show.
I know it's about a kid's show. Man, I mean, look, I would get it if we even showed stuff that was really terrible from V for Vendetta or Carnival Row, both of which are also age restricted. But like the Superman episode I did is age restricted. Like, what are we doing? Like, it just, none of these things make any sense. And every time I get comments all the time on that stuff where people are like, I watched this and what's age restricted about it? And I don't have an answer. My answer is invariably, I have no idea.
Yeah. And I think that's, you touch on this in previous episodes. That's the biggest issue with the social media platforms. And what they're doing is there's no transparency.
No.
What are the rules?
I have no idea. I have no idea what it is that I'm violating. Now, I have suspicions, right? And because I have suspicions, that's why we did the Age of Ultron episode with a whole bunch of like beeping out certain things, kind of beeping out the words and phrases and stuff that I assume are going to get me demonetized or age restricted, but it's all dumb. Like it's all it's like literally saying the word censorship, for example, is like something that will get me flagged.
Or COVID.
Oh, right. Yeah. Talking about the, it's funny because like
current unpleasantness.
The current unpleasantness will get you demonetized, which is like, but these are important things that we should be talking about right now.
Yep.
These are all really essential topics to cover, and to not have, I think this is, speaking of the current unpleasantness, if we're going to go ahead and use that term for this, I'm not so worried about getting, age restricted or demonetized on this show. But like at the same time, I think a lot of this stuff, it's so important that we talk about these things because it's been a year. It's been a little bit over a year now since lockdown started, since stay-at-home orders started, all of that kind of stuff. We should have had a lot of these conversations a year ago prior to doing this. Like we should have had cost-benefit conversations. We should have looked at the history of whether or not these things have worked in the past. We should have looked at whether or not the people recommending them had conflicts of interest or had reasons for recommending them that were reliable in any kind of way. Heck, we should have looked at the epidemiological models and said, well, have these been reliable in the past? Because the fact of the matter is they aren't very reliable. And they've never really been very reliable. And the ones that we use to terrify everybody, were not reliable at all for a multitude of reasons. And yet now, a year later, I have conversations with people all the time who are like, no, we had to do all of this stuff. Well, I think a lot of the reason why people assume that we had to do all of this stuff is because the debate that should have happened never happened. So they never really heard any dissenting voices early on. And when they did occasionally hear one, they were immediately painted as extremist lunatics.
Yeah, conspiracy
theorists, whatever, right? Well, there's so many things now that we've gone back on and re-looked at or looked at in more depth, where a lot of those things that people were talking about back then, people raising the alarm about nursing homes, for example.
Yeah.
A year later, we're really only just now starting to talk about it, starting to see lawsuits around it, starting to see people, dealing with the fact that we actually had policies that in many of the worst hit areas that were, actively harming people. Like, it's weird that, it makes me furious too. It's just weird that we didn't talk about it a year ago. Because I tried. Like, I tried to talk about it a year ago. But, nobody wanted to, So, I don't know. That stuff has been really interesting. And I think doing more and more stuff on free speech lately, for me, I think there's sort of a connection between all this stuff. Like, it's not just, like, free speech doesn't just matter because as an individual rights thing, although I think that matters tremendously. It also matters because it's how we suss out what's true or not true, about the world. Like, if we can't have these debates, if we can't talk about ideas and discuss them openly, then what are we doing? We just assume that whatever the guy in power said is true? It feels like a bad assumption to me.
Right. And it's predictably has led to, when you try to censor people for asking questions, it leads those people that get censored into believing ridiculous things.
Oh, yeah.
And then it just makes the situation worse.
Yeah. No, you can always see these like sort of rise of extremism in arenas where the open discussion wasn't allowed.
Yep.
Because they just get further and further down the kind of the rabbit hole of, secretive, arenas of talking about things. And that's never good. I don't know. It's been weird. It's been a weird year, for sure.
That is a fact.
So speaking of lockdowns and those kinds of things, there's one thing. Let's get into Raya. One of the most fascinating things to me about Raya was that if you stick around to the very end of the movie, you will note that the entire thing was done remotely from animators' home computers, basically.
That blows my mind.
It should. So I don't really want to call this exactly a silver lining, but if there was any sort of positive development that came from a lot of what we've experienced over the last year, it's that I think people have gotten really okay with people working from home and found ways to make it work. And to be able to do that on a movie of this scale, and I think we'll get into as good as its animation is. I have a lot of issues with the story of this movie that we can talk about in a minute, but I think all three of us would agree it's gorgeous.
Yes.
It's
absolutely stunning.
Yeah. And that's all done from people's homes, not from giant studios with, $6,000 computers in huge arrays. It's kind of amazing that this was able to be done the way that it was done. So I don't know. I guess I'm going to start there. But Jen, Paul, first thoughts, maybe start with Jen. What first thoughts about Raya?
Well, as we just said, it is a gorgeous movie. It is so lovely to look at. It is absolutely stunning, visually speaking. And it's the story of a girl, Raya, who's a princess in this.
Of course,
sort of
she's a princess.
Naturally.
Of course, she's a princess.
It's Disney,
Naturally.
so therefore
Disney. So she's a princess in this mythical broadly Asian world, and her country is tasked with protecting the last manifestation of dragon magic in the world. Dragons used to be very common. They were wonderful. They were magical. They brought the rain, and everybody was happy when the dragons were around. And then suddenly an existential threat appears, and these sort of smoke monsters turn people to stone. Just kind of that's their jam. That's what they do. And it's a big problem because they were turning the dragons to stone too. Until the last 5 dragons in the world got together and pulled their magic into this one singular gem. And through the power invested in that gem,
I guess,
the smoke monsters were driven away, and all of the humans turned back into humans. The dragons remained stone. And that was 500 years prior to the action of this movie. And so that gem still exists, and it is protected in the kingdom of Heart. And that's where Raya is from. She's the princess there.
Princess of Heart.
And her dad has this dream to reunite the lands into one big happy nation, I guess.
Kumandra.
And Kumandra.
Kumandra. It's a great name.
Yeah.
It is a great name. So that's the goal. And so he invites all of the chiefs of the other nations to come hang out and eat soup. And
that's where he went wrong.
And that's where it went wrong.
Should have brought out some steak.
Yeah. Well, so let's pause here for a second, because so this is actually one of the things for me. So yeah, the rest of the story really. Sorry, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but but everything goes awry, right? Like as Paul said, like that's where it went wrong. You know, like this is the moment where, you know, he brings everybody there. He's got this grand idea of reuniting everybody and kind of reconnecting the world together. But nobody trusts each other, and everybody's kind of terrible to each other. And then they, you know, the major spoiler part of this, although this is basically the entire plot of the movie, is that they break the gem, and all of these horrible smoke monster things come back into the world, and they start turning people to stone again. And then, you know, we flash forward to 6 years later, and Raya's there, you know, kind of roaming the world trying to piece this gem back together, basically. And so most of the movie is actually Raya in this 6 years later world where it's actually just terrible dystopia, you know. But there's a lot of things, like why I wanted to stop there to some extent is because one of the things that actually just bothered me right from the get-go. So the movie is beautiful, and there's a lot of really good bits in there. And the character designs are great. Like the water, the textures, the environmental design, all that stuff is spectacular. It's like every single time Disney or Pixar puts out a new movie, they make some huge leap in their ability to do reality in animation, and it's incredible. And not only that, Paul and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, but like you would assume that like with all of these wonderful advancements and being able to do more and more realistic stuff, that you'd end up with like an uncanny valley thing with the characters themselves. But we don't even go there. Like the characters are still very Disney. It's still cartoony. So you don't have any moments of like, ooh, that's a weird, you know, Beowulf or you know, Polar Express kind of like, what's happening here kind of stuff. So it looks amazing. But then, like, for me, the story has so many weird problems that, like, just feel super fixable to me. And so there are a lot of things about this movie that kind of bug me, starting with that very first moment of bringing everybody together. The Chief of Heart invites all of the other tribes. And let's also stipulate that learning about all these tribes happened in exposition, happened in narration. Like we didn't go to any of these places and like meet them in any kind of real show don't tell kind of way. So all we have is like Raya's sort of, you know, point by point bullets of who these people are. They all show up to this thing, but they all show up just to yell at him. And they all show up at the same time. And then all these people show up and then say, this is a trap. If you thought it was a trap, why'd you come? If you thought that he was just there to, like, poison you or something, why would you accept the invitation to dinner? Like, right off the bat for me, there are little things like that and that's not even that little of a thing. There's just a lot of stuff about this movie that I'm like, you've told me that the world is one particular way, but then nobody behaves the way that it's the way that you said. So, you know, flashing forward a little bit, we talk about how, you know, one of these places, Talon, I think, was it Talon? I forget which place had the market. Was it Tail?
Yeah.
Talon? Anyway, so it's this gorgeous, gorgeous market that's sort of reminiscent of like a Thai river market or something like that. You know, really beautiful stuff everywhere. And then we're told that 95% of the population is now gone. They're all turned to stone. But then when we finally make it back to that market, everything is the same. You know, like there's still tons of stuff everywhere. There's still people packing the streets. People seem to be happy. It's a weird thing to me because it's like we've established something with this movie that I think opens the door to a lot of pretty interesting conversations about like what happens to a world when most of your people are gone, you know? And then it just doesn't go there, which I think is very strange for me. It's something that like right off the bat kind of bothered me about the movie. Now, the movie is improved dramatically by Awkwafina when she shows up.
Yes.
But I don't know. All that stuff, like underlying everything, just kept coming back to me, and it just kept seeming weird.
Yeah, this movie definitely, and we looked through the credits this morning to get ready for the show, and how many writers are on this?
Just 10.
A lot.
10. I think 10 credited writers. There's 2 screenplay buys and like 8 story buys.
You feel it. You feel that.
And also 4 directors. There's 2 directors and 2 other people who are credited as co-directors. So like, oof. It's way too many cooks.
Yeah.
Which is funny for a movie that has a metaphor about too many cooks. I mean,
this definitely is art by committee, and you could tell. I would be interested in the first iteration before everyone else got their hands on it. I'm not sure if that even where that started or what.
I don't even know how. But who knows?
If there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of interesting things that they could have talked about.
Yeah.
But then it seemed like, oh no, we actually have to do this.
It feels like to some extent. So the main theme of the movie is really about trust, and I think this is an interesting theme from a societal standpoint, because trust is like super, super important to everything we do as individuals, and in particular, how we interact with people from other cultures, right? One of the big problems that we have, putting on the sort of economist hat for a second, like the biggest problem you have usually with trading is the trust barrier, right? So I want to know that I'm going to give you something that's valuable to me, like my money or whatever, and that the thing that I am giving that in exchange for is actually the thing that you're promising me, right? So if you say, I have this cow, is consistently producing wonderful milk and everything else, well, I want to know that that's true. Or like now, right? Like I'm going to go buy a car. I want to know that car is going to be reliable. It's not going to break down on me the minute that I drive it off the lot. So if you've never met somebody before, or if they, now add to that, you've never met the individual, but also they're from a culture that you're not part of. So there's no tribal identity that you can sort of, align yourself with in that sense. Well, how do you trust people, right? And so that's a pretty important theme. And when you have a really fractured world, it's an even more important theme. And so I think, like, we're living through a moment right now where not only is there, I think, quite a lot of distrust among people across cultures, but there's also a lot of mistrust among people inside our own culture, So I think it's a great theme to explore. But this movie to me feels like that theme was like bashed into it. Like, we have to have a theme, and it was like the most simplistic theme we could cram into it, that was like we were going to hammer home a whole bunch of times, which is, again, it's just like it became art by committee to me. It's like there's something in there that was a really, really good idea, and then it just doesn't feel like there's a singular authorial voice that came through.
No,
at all.
You definitely feel that.
Which is not true. It's not how I feel about a lot of Pixar movies, particularly the earlier ones. Like The Incredibles is a Brad Bird movie, and it really feels like a Brad Bird movie. If you've seen Iron Giant, or if you've seen some of his other work, this is really in line with the way that he sees the world. I have no idea what other than Disney movie, right? Other than generically Disney. I don't know. Jen, did you get that from this movie, or did you feel differently about it?
No, this movie, like from a dialogue standpoint, from the way that the themes were presented and the lessons that we were supposed to be learning from this story, it felt very bland. It felt very generic, and there was a lot of telling and not a lot of showing, which is a shame, because it was so beautiful. I would have loved to have seen more in this movie, and it just didn't happen. That was a big failing as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. No, it's really disappointing, because going into this movie, watching this, I didn't have a lot of interest, because I'd heard the reviews. It was on Disney Plus Premiere, which that's a whole other discussion.
Oh, we should talk about that too.
And so I was not excited about that. But as soon as I start seeing how beautiful, how just gorgeous the environment is, the level of detail that they took to differentiate the cultures, but then that's where the depth stops.
It's just visual.
It's just visual on the surface.
Yeah.
And this is, surprisingly for me, I want to know more about this world. It's an interesting world. I want to know why they didn't trust each other. Why did they?
Yeah, why when this horrible natural disaster happened at the beginning, 500 years ago, right? And then everybody came together and banded together and everything was good for 500 years. Basically, everything was relatively good comparatively. But first of all, everybody's fighting each other over the gem for that whole time, which also, why did Hart end up with the gem? Why didn't they develop a system where it would be passed around, or it's weird because you'd think if there was going to be so much fighting for 500 years around this one thing, that why wasn't there a solution found to that problem?
Yeah, why was the trust not there? And they also touched on how Hart had more resources.
Yeah, which you didn't really see though.
The only time they talk about is when she asked the young Numari.
Namari, yeah.
If she liked rice or noodles, and
she's like, "Oh, we never had rice."
So why?
And that's the thing. So this is part of what gets me. This is the next phase of the thing that I have a really big complaint about, which is that after the monsters come back, which, by the way, the monsters are metaphors anyway in the movie for like human angst and anger and mistrust and like all of the negative feelings that people have towards each other anyway. So it was kind of the point of those. Yeah, it is a little bit. It also reminds me of Ghostbusters 2 for it is actual like obvious reasons, but it's weird because it's like, the slime that's pooling everybody's anger and animosity towards each other, whatever. But the thing is, like, going back to Paul's point, like, we are told that Hart has all of the resources, and people blame or people credit that to the gem, right? They say, well, because you have this gem, you guys are rich, everybody else is poor, and so we want to take this gem from you for our kingdoms so that our kingdoms can be rich like yours. Except that when you actually go around and see all of these other places, they have opulent palaces. Most of them do. Like the kind of Mongolian one, Spine, I think it is, like in the northern, regions or whatever. Right. It doesn't have opulent palaces, but it still has,
They have resources that all the other
they have tons of resources. I mean, they're in the middle of a forest. They have mountains, water. I don't understand. I don't see what anybody's missing.
Right.
But even after 6 years of 90% of the population being turned to stone, they still all seem to have resources. Mm-hmm. So, like, I don't get that either. Like, if you're going to establish something like that, if you're going to tell me that 90% of your population being turned to stone caused a devastating problem for the people of this world, which it should, right? Like, there's no reason why it wouldn't. But then why don't I see that? Why isn't your palace crumbling now? Why are your markets full of people? Why do you have seemingly no problem getting food or making even the same soup, right? Like, even something as simple as, like, we've got all of the ingredients that we need to make this soup that they were going to make at the beginning of the movie. They come back, and this kid character that they meet is able to serve them this same kind of soup, which is like, where'd you get all that stuff? If 95% of the population is gone. So one of the things, I don't want to totally derail this, but like, there's another movie that I watched recently that I really like called Love and Monsters, which is I don't know if it's on any particular platform right now. I actually just bought it on VOD because it seemed interesting to me, and I watched it. And it's a movie where it's sort of a similar plot, except for everybody's dead, which is that, like, there's basically the gist is there's an asteroid attack, and to solve the asteroid problem, humanity bombs the asteroid and it splinters into a bunch of millions of pieces, and they're saved from the asteroid except for all the chemicals from these rockets rain down on the entire planet, and caused mutated creatures, anything that was cold-blooded, I guess they said in the movie. So mutated cockroaches and ants and frogs and birds and whatever. Not birds, but all get like mutated and become giant and they eat most of the population. 95% of the population is dead. But then everybody's living in bunkers as a result. The tiny percentage of the population that's left is actually affected by this in a really aggressive way. So they're all living in bunkers. Going out on the surface is a huge risk. The plot of that movie is about a guy who connects with the girl that he was dating prior to the attack via radio. She lives in another bunker or in another colony or whatever. And the whole plot of that movie is him leaving his bunker, traversing 80 plus miles over, mutant monster infested land to go find this girl that he loved, really he thought he loved when he was 17. And it's great because like the thing that you would expect would happen in that kind of world happened, right? Like it's really consistent with its own internal logic. And I really, really like that but I mean, there's many other things I like about the movie too, but like, part of the reason why it feels believable to me and part of the reason why the story really works is because the story doesn't pull punches on its own premise. It doesn't say, for example, I think, Jen, we were talking a little bit about Raya, and the whole theme is about trust, and sort of the end of the movie is Awkwafina's character, Sisu, who's the last dragon, really, encouraging Raya to make that first leap of faith, right? To reach out, to offer, to extend her trust to Namari, who, was literally the person who broke the gem, and kind of wrecked the world. So that's fine. Okay, so let's play that out. It's okay to redeem a character like that and try to reconnect with that person. But there are many other characters in the movie, including Namari's mom, who you're like, well, why did nothing happen to her as a result of any of this? There's an internal logic here.
There were a lot of characters that just got a pass because dragons. Yeah.
So, everything is fine.
This is fine.
I mean, the thing with Namari's mom is that it's like Namari, technically, yes, Namari broke the gem, but Namari broke the gem because she was a kid and her mom
put her up to it.
Her mom told her to do it. Her mom was grooming her to be this nefarious person or whatever. So,
cat warrior.
Yeah. And I mean, the mom didn't do anything to redeem herself. And yet at the end of the movie, we're just, she's fine.
Yeah.
No problem. I don't know. I mean, it's just stuff like that. Just feels, again, like there was something good in there that just got missed as a result.
Yeah. That was probably my biggest problem with this movie. And like, I get it. It's a Disney movie. It's a kid's movie from Disney.
Sure.
But you can have consequences that aren't like gruesome or bloody or over the top, you know? But there were no consequences for anybody.
But go back to some of Disney's best movies, and you'll see consequences, right?
Yeah.
And not just like Mufasa dies, he's dead. Like, there's like,
the spirit in the sky.
Spirit in the sky kind of stuff, but like he's gone. He's no longer Simba's dad at that point. Like, he's out of the movie. And that plays a really, really important role in his character development for the rest of the movie. When Scar and the hyenas are challenged and defeated, they are defeated. Things happen. There are consequences for what they did, right? So Disney's done this. I mean, they've done it better in the past.
Yeah, Beauty and the Beast, Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Cruella de Vil.
For sure.
Well,
she's coming back.
Never mind.
There were consequences for Cruella de Vil. Now apparently we're going to retcon that, turn it into whatever. But
my biggest concern for Disney is that I don't know how to say this well on a few hours of sleep, but they aren't interested in the art anymore.
Yeah. I get that sense a lot of the time.
And it's disappointing because, yes, this is a kid's movie. Yes, they make kids' movies. But looking back on my life, I'm sure everyone that's listening, your guys' life, movies like Aladdin, Lion King had major impacts on me.
Yeah.
And are some of my favorite pieces of art to this day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's just disappointing that kids, like my sons, might not have new movies like that from Disney.
Well, this is the my like the angry conversation from I guess when this airs, it'll probably be 2 episodes back. I think if I'm getting the timing right about Boss Baby.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like where we're going with this stuff. It's like,
yeah,
okay.
Well, yeah, and I
Here's
think
where we're at. Show your kids Boss Baby. That'll be a timeless classic.
Gosh. Yeah, but there's the Boss Babies. Yeah, we touched on this. The Boss Babies. There was always Boss Babies, but there was always.
But now there's like only Boss Babies.
Only Boss Babies.
Which is what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and Disney was always
Yeah.
good at making
Yeah.
new, interesting ideas with characters that you hadn't seen before.
Now, the thing is, this is a pretty common trajectory for especially really big companies.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the reasons why, I mean, this is like kind of a wild turn here a little bit, but like one of the reasons why I rarely worry about the bigness of different companies, big corporations and stuff like that is because you can see this pattern happen all the time where like a corporation gets big, like a company, I should say, gets big because it does something really, really well, right? Like it starts off with, some really entrepreneurial innovation, or it creates a market that didn't even exist before, right? And Disney, I think, is in that category. Like Walt Disney saw a market for feature-length animation that literally nobody thought was possible.
Right.
And he invested tons of money in doing Snow White.
Risked it all.
Yeah, he was gonna blow everything that he had on this thing, and everybody thought he was an idiot for it. He did it again with theme parks 10 years later or whatever.
Right.
Like 15 years later. So that kind of vision is very, very rare, and it's the kind of vision that you can build a multi-billion-dollar enterprise on. I mean, it's a vision that nobody has. But the problem is, as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you start to develop systems, and you start to develop, like, this is the way that we've always done it kind of syndrome. And you stop innovating a little bit. And even if you want to innovate, it gets harder because you've got just too many moving parts to turn towards one direction or another, So these things get harder and harder the bigger that you get. And I mean, look, I think anybody who's spent a little bit of time working or even managing people will see this too. Like, it's not a linear progression of difficulty. It is like an exponential progression of difficulty. Managing 1 or 2 people is, this hard, but managing 5 people is like that hard. Like it gets insane very, very quickly once you start, adding more people. Well, now add 100,000 people, and
just in the park division.
Just in the parks division. Oh my gosh, I know. I mean, it's
massive,
and probably a lot more than that. Actually.
Yeah, just for the cruise line.
Euro Disney, cruise lines, Euro Disney, Disney Japan, Disney, like China, probably
Disneyland,
Disney World. Like it's enormous, and keeping all of those balls in the air is really, really hard. And so to do it, you have to build systems that are independent of the individual in a lot of ways. Yeah. But once you've done that, you've made it a lot more stagnant. You can't change those systems quickly. You can't do a lot with it quickly. So, eventually you stagnate and you end up with, unfortunately, you end up with a decline.
It's really unfortunate because, especially just bringing it back to Riot, this should be a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
It has It has all the ingredients.
It does.
Bringing it back to the soup to make something that's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's just committed to death.
And that's the thing is, it's interesting to me about it a little bit is that, like, I think systems work really, really, really well. Like good systems work really well to develop craft and to develop a product that is very competently made and consistently made, McDonald's, I think, is another example of this. I think McDonald's doesn't get enough credit for this. Like, McDonald's is insanely consistent. You can go to McDonald's almost anywhere on the planet, actually, and get essentially the same thing, which is, but going back to the point about trust, by the way, trust in businesses, like the McDonald's brand name means a certain thing. Now, you may not like it, or you may think it's bad or whatever. That's fine, but that's not the point. The point is, you know that when you see McDonald's somewhere. Also, by the way, next episode we're going to talk about McDowell's, but whenever you see McDonald's somewhere specifically, you know what you're going to get. That the promise of the brand is going to be delivered. It may not be a promise you want necessarily, like you may hate McDonald's as a result, but also because that brand is so consistent, you also know that there's no reason in trying McDonald's in Sweden, because McDonald's in Sweden is going to be the same McDonald's you don't want in America, right? Either way, you know that there's consistency there. Disney is becoming, or maybe already is, in a lot of ways, the McDonald's of, movies in that sense.
Yeah.
It's super consistent. Now, Disney also, as we're going to talk about with our Patreon bonus section in a few minutes here, they've also just bought a whole bunch of companies that were doing a lot of, it's the same thing with Pixar, right? Like, Pixar was doing things that were really unique and interesting, and they're kind of being rolled into that McDonald's thing. And I think Marvel could be the same thing. Fox could be the same thing. And so a little bit worried about those, those implications. But the thing that I would challenge everybody about a little bit is that sounds like we should be afraid of things getting big or whatever. I'm not really afraid of that, because the reality is, like, they break themselves.
Right. You see this all the time. Sears, where are they at? Kodak. They invented the digital camera.
Mm-hmm. Gone. Right. Yeah.
You look at the Fortune 500 from the 60s, and it's what, 5 are left?
Oh, yeah.
Something around there?
It's a very, very small percentage. I think for Fortune 500, I think that the number of companies that are in the Fortune 500 today that were in the Fortune 500 in the 90s is like 12, I think, total.
Yeah, so this idea that we're ruled by corporations forever, it's non-starter for me.
No, yeah, it churns all over the place all the time, and I think the freer the society is, the freer the market is, especially the more that happens, right? Yeah. So let's do some final thoughts on Riot. Paul,
wait till it's not on premium VOD on Disney Plus.
Yeah,
but once it's out, watch it just for the animation. It'll blow your mind, and watch it on the nicest, biggest screen you have.
Yeah.
Because that part is worth it. Let the story wash over you. You won't remember it the next day, but you will remember that water.
You might remember Awkwafina the next day.
Awkwafina's always great.
She's really good.
She's one of my favorite actors going right now.
Yeah. So I agree. I totally agree. I think, I don't understand the freemium thing. I think Disney's going to be outcompeted by that very, very soon. Because especially with Warner Brothers putting up things like the Snyder Cut, literally everything, but the Snyder Cut is coming out very, very soon. Mortal Kombat movies coming out soon.
It'll be interesting to see kids stuff, though.
Maybe.
I could see that.
And yes, certainly parents have a little bit more of an incentive to get their kids the first run of something like that, first run of a Disney movie, but I don't know. Yeah. I don't think that Disney's going to survive that for forever. And if they do, they're probably going to have to pull down the price somewhere.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. We'll see. The one really weird thing is that now with everything on streaming, like there's a lot less transparency in terms of box office numbers.
Right.
So for example, with Raya, I looked it up this morning. Raya has only made a gross of $56 million at the box office as of the time that we're...
Is that international?
Recording this. Is international. Ooh. Yeah, I know. It's really, really bad.
China's wide open.
Yeah, China...
Theaters are open. Everything.
Everything's wide open. You would think that just China alone, especially given the subject of the movie...
Right.
You would think that China would have flocked to see that, but...
Will the last two flops that Disney has done just specifically for the Chinese audience...
Mulan too, yeah.
Will that
change. I don't know.
Maybe there's some silver lining.
Maybe there's a silver lining there. But the thing is, we have no idea what their streaming revenue is. We have absolutely no idea. And they won't publish that. So anyway, Jen, final thoughts.
Yeah, this was a gorgeous movie. It was fun to look at, but it was really boring. Like it was very generic. There was nothing special about this story. But I do recommend that you watch it when it's not on premium VOD because it is just gorgeous.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think my final thought is, Jen, you and I should get together and figure out how to make that soup. Because
yes, absolutely, we should.
I think it'll be worth it.
I'll eat it.
I think anyone should. But all right. So that is it for this part of the discussion. If you are a supporter of the show on Patreon or Subscribestar, which you can, of course, always do at subscribestar.com/outoframeshow or patreon.com/outoframeshow, stick around, and we are going to continue this discussion with another Disney Plus property, WandaVision. But for everybody else, thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube or listening to us on any of the various podcast platforms we're on, please don't forget to check out the Out of Frame series on YouTube. It's youtube.com/vonline, or check out Out of Frame on basically all the social channels that you can find. And plus, join us on Discord because we're growing that channel pretty substantially. And Jen and Paul and I are all there, and we're happy to talk to you guys. So with that in mind, thank you so much, and we will see you next time.